For 10 years now, John and Patsy Ramsey lived, until Patsy's death certainly, under a shadow of suspicion. They were even officially included at one point under the Boulder Police Department's, quote, umbrella of suspicion. Well, with the arrest of a suspect in their daughter's murder, will the dark clouds of suspicion finally lift from the Ramsey family? I'm joined once again in Los Angeles by ABC News legal analyst Royal Oakes, in San Francisco, former federal prosecutor Dean Johnson, and in San Diego, criminal defense attorney Jan Ronis. And Jan, let me start with you. As a defense attorney, handling a case when the media gets a hold of it, and your client is essentially convicted, what do you do, not just in the courtroom, but in that court of public opinion, to try and turn it around?
Well, it's a constant distraction, because not only does the attorney have to focus on representing his client, he has to focus on spending a lot of time with the press. And we all know that, I think, quite frankly, most people assume that people who are charged with offenses are guilty. And so oftentimes you go into jury selection, and the juries, the prospective jurors have been saturated with all the pretrial publicity. So it really makes it very difficult in the controversial cases to get a jury to basically reject all that pretrial publicity and tell you that they'll be fair and impartial. So it adds a dimension to the trial. It isn't unheard of, and we've had a lot of controversial cases in the last several years in this country that have had enormous pretrial publicity.
And what happened here, do you think? Well, why was there essentially a kind of media lynching of John and Patsy Ramsey over the murder of their daughter?
Well, anytime there's a child victim, that brings out the strongest of emotions. You had affluent parents in an affluent community. You had police essentially, I think, bungling, I think that's clear now, the early stages of this investigation. And so it just had all the elements, that are the most controversial. You had parents that were alleged to have killed their child, a beautiful child, a controversial lifestyle that she was leading. There was a lot of condemnation of the family because of the fact that she essentially dressed up like a teenager in her spare hours. There were a lot of emotional aspects to this case. It was, in some ways, a matter of taste. People kind of had this sneering sense that anybody who would put their daughter in a child beauty pageant was likely to kill him. Let me ask Dean Johnson this question. One of the things that happened in this case clearly was the investigation leaked like a sieve. There were more details of what was happening in the investigation of the Ramsey case, the autopsy, questioning of the Ramseys, what they did, what they did that morning, than in almost any case I can remember. That is not what prosecutors are supposed to do, is it?
No, it absolutely isn't. As a prosecutor, you just want to give the public the general facts of what's going on and not the details of the investigation. And this case is a real paradigm that illustrates why, because now that they have a suspect in custody, if they ever do go back to trial, the prosecution's previous theories are going to come back to haunt them. That umbrella of suspicion was so wide, it encompassed JonBenet's parents, at one time her brother, at one time a guy who had played Santa Claus at the house over Christmas, and you can bet that when the defense comes back with its theories, they're going to say, look, ladies and gentlemen, look at all of these people that the DA has accused. Are we supposed to think that they're right now, or is there also evidence pointing equally to all of these other people who are under the umbrella of suspicion? That's why you keep your mouth shut, and that's why the prosecution should have done so in this case. And it seems, Royal Oakes, like they have kept their mouth shut to this point, at least in the investigation of John Mark Carr. And I wonder, what do you think is his chances of getting a fair shake at this point, given the worldwide interest in this case?
It's going to be difficult, Terry, because it's not a huge town and everybody is wrapped up into it. But, the trend these days is not to ship it off to another state or another district. Instead, the judge just redoubles the efforts to make sure there's a fair trial, to have that jury selection go extra long to make sure you get the unbiased witness. Also, it wasn't like some communities that were terrorized. The entire town was on edge or fearful about it. But as you say, there was that juggernaut of suspicion about the Ramseys. And The fact that the Ramseys refused to take a polygraph test. They refused to be interviewed separately. The fact that John Ramsey was the first to find the body and that he allegedly moved some of the evidence as he was trying to figure out if his child was still alive. All of that convinced so many people that these folks were guilty.
Yeah, let me come back to this question of John Mark Carr and the confession, the admission that he's made in public and the problems with it. Let's speculate for a moment. That's kind of what's been happening in this case. Why? Why would somebody come forward and say, I killed JonBenet Ramsey?
That's part of the reason that people are suspicious that it's a hoax. Number one, why would you do it? Why wouldn't you do the typical, I'm not going to speak, I'm going to talk to a lawyer? Number two, is it possible, some people have even speculated, he just wanted to get home. He didn't want Thailand justice, and he figured that if he copped to this, if he confessed to this crime, at least he'd be back to the United States, and then maybe he can recant the confession. Maybe it's just pure mental illness. He doesn't know what he's saying. He has no judgment whatsoever. Right now, we're really in the realm of speculation as to where this guy's coming from.
Absolutely. Jen Ronas, is it possible that a person could confess details that he knows are wrong? In other words, he might have done it and is trying to mess up the case because there is no real evidence aside from his own admissions at this point. I guess the DNA evidence will come in.
Sure. I mean, we've seen all kinds of notorious cases where people have confessed to that they didn't commit. Some people have a perverse, aspect of seeking publicity. Very well may be that. I think the fundamental question here is whether the district attorney is going to file charges against Mr. Carr. That's what I'd like to know now. So far, they haven't.
Well, we'll find out. I want to thank Royal Oaks and Dean Johnson and Jan Ronas for this discussion of what's going on in the JonBenet Ramsey case.